going to be talking about wise finances tonight. So we're talking about different aspects of family and talked about wise priorities, wise habits, wise with technology, and then tonight, wise finances. And so, Wes, you mind getting the door right there? Michael? He's got it. You got something for me? Nope, I don't.
You got an invitation song for that?
Nope.
Look at you. It's like you've done this before.
Well, I don't know. It's first time. First time like this, but we are passing out the handouts for tonight. If you didn't get one, raise your hand, and Cody and Jeff will get you one. Talking about wise finances. So, you know, it seems like sometimes you have things on some days that just don't go your way at all. It's like, you know, everything just goes wrong. And I don't know, it seems like we have more of those, been having more of those lately with mechanical stuff or things like that. But I got to tell you a good story tonight. So I had, when we went camping back in the fall, on fall break week to Gatlinburg, somehow I lost our camper keys to lock the door and get into other compartments on the camper. And I lost the keys. And I thought I'd put them just in the console of the Yukon there. Well, we looked everywhere, never found them. But I was just thinking, in the last few days, I thought I've got to get a replacement key because we never found those. And we're going to go camping again and need a key. But in the meantime, the Yukon, the front wheel bearing went out, which seems like we've had a habit of wheel bearings going out lately. But anyways, had a wheel bearing go out. So I take it to Bailey Tire today to change the wheel bearing and change the front brake pads. And I'll be if I didn't get back in my Yukon, and they found my keys sitting there on my console now. So I guess they were hiding in the wheel bearing. I don't know the story of how they found them. All I know is somehow Bailey Tire found my keys that were lost somewhere hidden up in my Yukon somewhere. So I told Amanda, I said, the moral of this story, she hates this. It's just wait, do nothing, and eventually it'll come back around and it'll work out. That didn't always work out as a husband. You know, sometimes that gets me into trouble. But it did work out this time. That has nothing to do with our lesson. Just a story to get us started. So, did you get a sheet? Wise financial decisions. This is an outline taken from Mark Ray that I used some of his material on Proverbs. And there's a lot of scripture here from the book of Proverbs, and I invite you to turn back to Proverbs, and we're going to read some of these, probably about half of them. We won't be able to read them all with each point, but there's seven points from Proverbs related to financial decisions. Now, it's amazing how much Proverbs talks about money. And so here are some seven lessons from Proverbs. Let's begin with number one. The disappointments and limitations of wealth. So the first blank is disappointments and limitations of wealth. So when Proverbs is talking about wise living and dealing with money, it talks about how money can disappoint us, wealth can disappoint us, and how it is limited in what it can provide. So let's look at some of these references here. For example, chapter 11, verse number 4. Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. Riches will not profit you in the day of your turmoil, the day of, probably in the Old Testament concept, the day of everything falling apart, maybe the day of judgment in the sense of the foreign powers coming in and sweeping you away and taking you into captivity. When they came in, the Assyrians came in, it didn't matter whether you were rich or poor, everybody got carried away. The riches did not help. In a New Testament context, riches do not help you on the day of judgment. riches do not help on the day of wrath, but righteousness will deliver you from death. There's limits to wealth. In chapter 22, verses 1 and 2, a good name is to be chosen. This is a famous verse, right? A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold. The rich and poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. You know, money can't buy you a good name. Your reputation, your influence can be had whether you are rich or whether you're poor. He says that we should choose a good name. We should choose honesty. Now, this is going to be counterbalanced with some of the things he's going to say later on about dishonesty and how people try to gain wealth through dishonesty, but when they gain wealth through dishonesty, it destroys their good name. There have been people, you may have been in circumstances in your life where you had the opportunity to gain wealth, but you knew you would compromise your integrity, you would compromise your name, your reputation, your influence by pursuing and having that wealth. A good name is greater and more important than wealth. And then chapter 23, he says, do not overwork to be rich. Verse 4, because of your own understanding cease. Will you set your eyes on that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away like an eagle toward heaven. We had an eagle at our house almost all day Sunday. Beautiful bald eagle. And eagles are so majestic as they soar. And it's interesting that the Proverbs writer compares wealth to an eagle and how an eagle can mount up and fly. And we think about Isaiah and, mount up on wings like eagles and that strength picture of being able to lift up and fly strong. But here it's talking about how your money can disappear quickly. You don't put your trust in it. Don't put all your heart in money. Jesus talks about this in Matthew chapter 6, doesn't he? About how we're not to lay up treasures on earth where moth, rust can corrode them and destroy them. But we are to lay up our treasures in heaven. And so wealth can disappoint us, and it is limited. So what is more important than money? Could you name one thing yourself that's more important than money? What's something that's more important than money? We mentioned name, a good name, but what else is more important than money? Health. Can't buy that, can you, Joel? Family. Family's more important than money. And we can't buy a family.
Friends.
Aaron?
Friends.
Friends. Good one, Aaron. Yeah, friends are very important. So all things that wealth can't buy. Another thing here, what can money not do? Kind of the opposite side of that. Money can't, it's limited, isn't it? It can't always, even though doctors and others promise us things and they'll take a lot of our money, they can't always buy our health or provide health, can they? Health can't keep our loved ones from experiencing pain, hurt, and death. Money can't sometimes protect people from going through violence and harm. Money is limited in what it can do. And so money has its limitations. What else? Anything else on that? Happiness, that's a big one. Yeah, money does not mean you're happy. Money doesn't mean you're happy. A lot of people think it does, don't they? And there's certainly some temporary happiness that comes with money. But as far as permanent joy, money doesn't give that. It's limited in that. So Proverbs talks a lot about that. Number 2, good comments. The lack, that's the blank, lack of profit of wealth gained dishonestly. So, kind of interesting the way Proverbs words this and the way this point is made. In other words, it's saying you might gain financial profit, but it's really a lack to you. It's really not going to give you anything in the long run in terms of God. It's still a lack of profit if you gain wealth dishonestly, without integrity. Now, let's look to some of these verses. Chapter 13, verse number 11. Chapter 13, verse number 11. Wealth gained by dishonesty will be diminished, but he who gathers by labor will increase. Wealth gained by dishonesty will be diminished, but he who gains by labor will increase. In chapter 15, verse number 6, in the house of the righteous there is much treasure, but in the revenue of the wicked is trouble. You know, if I had a super gift like thank you, Amanda. Superpower. If I had a superpower and it was like a Bible superpower, if you could have any one Bible superpower, I think my Bible superpower I would want to have would be to instantly be able to recall and have memorized any proverb that you might want at any moment. Wouldn't that be awesome? I mean, when you think about Proverbs and you read these Proverbs, it's like, wow, I wish I knew that at the right time. I wish I could tell someone that. They're just amazing. All these Proverbs that fit so appropriate into our life and into our time. And they're so wonderful. And yet, I don't know about you, but which I don't do the memory work I should, but I certainly cannot just have these recalled and memorize them and quote them to others. Chapter 16, verse 8. Better is a little with righteousness than vast revenues without justice. Better is a little with righteousness than vast revenues without justice. Chapter 21, verse number 6. Chapter 21, verse 6. Getting treasures by a lying tongue is the fleeting fantasy of those who seek death. Getting treasures by a lying tongue is the fleeting fantasy of those who seek death. So how do people seek to gain wealth dishonestly today? How do people seek to gain wealth dishonestly today? What are some methods? Stealing your identity. That's a big one. I was thinking of something in that regards too. People, underneath all this stuff with COVID, a lot of people are trying to steal people's identity to get their unemployment or filing unemployment for them in all other states and things. It seemed like some people, we tease my father-in-law because it seems like he must have an identity everybody wants, because he said that happened to him several times. But I mean, that is just low down. I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about here. What else? I've been worried all day, man. They've called me 5 times. I mean, obviously all the money I'm spending on vehicles, my extended warranty's out. That's a good one. All kinds of scams. I mean, and just from emails, text, they try every kind of latest technology to get to abuse people. And I tell you, some of that, I have to say, is really bad because it preys upon the weak, the feeble, and the struggling of our society the most. I never will forget this little different situation, but there was a situation back 20 years ago, back in Tennessee, about a man his name was Mr. Prince, and he was an elderly gentleman who wasn't, his faculties were starting to diminish, and he didn't have anybody to really look after him, and he had gotten to going to one of the places that will loan you so much money, and for hardly nothing down and give him the money, and he got to doing that, and then he, of course, he couldn't pay it, and they had him so stressed out, and they were really mistreating him, and it was a situation where it might have legally been right, but there wasn't anything ethical or right about it at all. They were mistreating an elderly member of our society, and causing his health to diminish because of all the stress. And I think that's what Proverbs is talking about here. This dishonesty, trying to gain money through lying, through dishonesty, through types of behaviors that are certainly inappropriate for someone. So how are Christians, how are Christians tempted to do this same? How are we tempted? Anybody got any thoughts of how we're tempted to do this same with dishonesty?
Well, it's tax time. And that's the time when people are really tempted to evade on the taxes.
Yeah. So tax time, that's a good point. Dishonest with our tax season and our accountability to those rules. That's a good point. Anything else? All right, so we got to be careful about not trying to gain profit in any kind of dishonest way. I don't know. I did not follow it, so I'm speaking out of ignorance. But whatever happened with the Robin Hood and the GameStop and all that, but that seemed like that would kind of fall in the same category of, it can be even money issues of people being dishonest and trying to, with stocks and bonds, there's always a lot of things going on with illegal trading and things. And so whatever, that may not apply to some of us, but any kind of thing like that is Christians. It's only illegal when they change the rules. That's some dishonesty right there. Number 3, the destructiveness of the love of money. The destructiveness of the love of money. Chapter 15, verse 27. Chapter 15, verse 27. He who is greedy for gain troubles his own house, but he who hates bribes will live. Proverbs talks a lot about bribes and paying people to do things, in people that had positions, demanding bribes. And if you've worked in or ever had much to do with missions and foreign countries and things, that's often the way those nations which have a lot of corruptness, that's just kind of how they have worked in society, with bribes being a natural part of that system. And it causes all kinds of corruption and all kinds of problems. And so Proverbs talks a lot about this idea of not accepting bribes, not being someone who demands a bribe. And here he says, he who is greedy for gain troubles his own house. In chapter 22, verse 16, chapter 22, verse 16, he who oppresses the poor to increase his riches, and he who gives to the rich will surely come to poverty. See, he who oppresses the poor to increase his riches. So you're oppressing the poor, and kind of like I was talking about with Mr. Prince, to gain your own wealth. Proverbs 27, verse 20. A faithful man will abound with blessings, but he who hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. So that love or desire, that hastening forward to it. When I think about this one, of course, I think about 1 Timothy chapter 6. And this is the only New Testament passage I put on there, but it seems to apply so well. When it talks about the love of money in the Old Testament, of course, Paul will use that exact phrase in the New Testament when he will say about the love of money in chapter 6, beginning in verse 9. But those who desire, that's the love idea, to be rich fall into temptation. Notice it's not the issue in the Old and New. It's not the issue of being rich or being wealthy, but it is the issue of desiring that above God and above other people. They fall into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Money twists our thinking, and money causes us to fall into traps that can ruin our thought process. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving, through this desire, that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pains. So it's through this craving. Notice the descriptive words we have here. It's almost like we're talking about some type of addiction, an addiction toward a drug or alcohol or some kind of sexual addiction. When he talks about it in terms of money, he talks about desire. When I use the word desire, you're probably not initially going to think about money, are you? And then he talks about craving. And then he talks about this idea of love. Now think about those three words: desire, craving, and love. But in this passage, all of them are relating to money. And the illustration is one of a trap where they would, Paul's illustration is of a trap where they would dig a hole, and they would put poles, and they would put real sharp poles in the ground, and they would cover that hole with some brush and things, and then the animal would come over that, a small animal or something, and it would fall into that little hole, and they would pierce themselves through. And that's if you read that language, you understand that's what Paul's talking about. He's talking about a hole that they fall in and they wander away and they pierce themselves through. And he talks about plunge people into ruin and destruction. So the illustration is you fall into a hole and you're pierced through and you're stuck there. And that's what the love of money does to us. So, will a greedy man ever be satisfied? Will a greedy man ever be satisfied? That's a pretty basic question, isn't it? Proverbs says, no, greedy man's never satisfied. There's never enough. You always want the next field, the next $1,000, the next $1 million, whatever it is, you always want more. A greedy man's never satisfied. So, what is so enticing about money that we love or desire it so much? Why do we desire money so much?
The lack of it causes problems too.
Yes. Proverbs is going to talk about that here in a moment. That if we don't have money, it can cause a lot of problems too. All right? So we desire it because of what it can give us, what it can provide, the security it can give us. What else? Why do we desire money? Yeah. The status that it would give us in our community, in our culture. It's a big pleasure. Pleasure comes with money. What's that country song? You can buy me a boat. List all these things that money can buy me. It may not can buy me happiness, but it can buy me this. I don't think they wrote that from Proverbs. But that's what the world sees about it, right? So this love or desire of money. And so here's the thing. We got to keep this in check, because if we allow it to overcome us, just like any type of craving, any type of desire, we're never satisfied with it. We never get a point where we say that's enough. It's like the rich man that Jesus tells about in Luke chapter 12. He's going to tear down his barns and build bigger barns. He never could be satisfied. Somebody say, Josh? That's a good point, Kim. It goes, and kind of what Joel was saying, it goes in all different directions with it. All right, number 4. The great value of contentment. Value and contentment. The great value of contentment. So let's read some of these. Chapter 15, verse 16. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure with trouble. Better is a little, if you got the Lord, than have great treasure where you got trouble. Chapter 27, verse number 20. Chapter 27, verse 20. Hell and destruction are never full. They're never satisfied. So the eyes of man are never satisfied. Never satisfied. Always wanting more. Can't be content. Chapter 28, verse number 6. Chapter 28, verse 6. Better is the poor who walks in his integrity than one perverse in his ways, though he be rich. So, getting back to that dishonest idea, better is the poor man who walks in his integrity than one who has riches but has lost it. In chapter 38 and 9, remove falsehood and lies far from me. And this is talking about contentment and this idea of not having poverty and not having riches. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food allotted to me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. I like that verse because it talks about the idea that the temptations go both ways. That the poor person has a lot of temptations too. And the rich person has a lot of temptations. Remember, Jesus even talked about how hard it was for a rich man to enter heaven because of his desires and the dependence upon money. But also the poor man has his challenges because he does not have anything. He has lack, and he often is tempted to go into dishonesty, as it talks about here, stealing. So he says, lest I be full and deny you, and say, who is the Lord? So he prays this prayer. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Now that's a hard prayer to pray, isn't it? We would pray the first part of it pretty well. Give me not poverty, Lord, but what about riches? Riches comes with challenges too. Feed me with the food allotted to me. You know, back in 1 Timothy chapter 6 that we were reading about how Paul talks about the love of money. Right before talking about this love of money and the desire of money, he says in verse 6, there is great gain in godliness with contentment. Godliness with contentment. So before he talks about this love of money, he gives us the secret here. We've got to have contentment. So how do we have contentment? How does contentment counteract the love of money? How does contentment counteract the love of money? Finding this balance. What do y'all think? Anybody got a comment on that? If you're content, you're not seeking more, you're satisfied. So contentment gives us some satisfaction. Think about this with food, right? I've been working in my life on learning as a 44-year-old man that I should be satisfied with one full plate. It tastes so good, I like to go back for that second plate, right? But I really have enough if I just wait a little bit and let my food all settle in. I've got enough. I don't need to eat more because the rest just adds on more weight, right? I need to learn to be satisfied with what I have and not wanting more and more. And I think Proverbs, of course, compares it with food. It says, have your food, let me be thankful for the food allotted to me. Well, think about that idea. Jesus talks about the same idea. Give us this day our daily bread. He didn't say, give us the smorgasbord, give us the buffet, but he's saying, you don't need to not have bread, but you also don't need to have every kind of bread in the world. Be thankful for the bread you have. Give us this day our daily bread. Yeah. I was reading through that, and this thing about eating manna for 40 years. And then the Bible talks about when Joshua and they go into the land, and it says they started living off the land God provided there, and so it says the manna stopped. And I thought, wonder how hard it was on them for the manna to stop. Because then it was like, first day, like, wow, we don't have to eat manna anymore. We get this good, stuff off the land. But then how long they had to figure out, wait a minute, I got to work to get this bread. I got to work to get all this off the produce of the land. And I think sometimes we're in that same boat, aren't we? We just want it handed to us, and we got to realize that we need to go out and get it. And Proverbs is going to talk about that too. All right, anything else on that? All right, number 5. What the godly man should do with his money. What the godly man should do with his money. Well, let's go to Proverbs chapter 3. Proverbs chapter 3, 9 and 10. What should you do with your money? Well, Proverbs 3 says, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. Honor the Lord with your possessions. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22. Proverbs 13, verse 22. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous. The Proverbs doesn't say we shouldn't save. In fact, Proverbs talks about how we should be good accountants of our money. We ought to know the condition of our herds. We ought to know the condition of our flocks. We ought to, keep records and know our money. And he also talks about here we've got to save up. We need to store up for our children's children, that we should leave an inheritance. And I think he's talking about this idea of being a wise steward with our money. In chapter 22, verse number 9. Chapter 22, verse 9. He who has a generous eye will be blessed. A generous eye will be blessed. For he gives of his bread to the poor. He gives of his bread to the poor. He talks about the idea that we need to be generous. So we need to honor the Lord. We need to store up for our family and take care of our family. Paul would say that a man that doesn't take care of his family is worse than an unbeliever. So we got to make sure we take care of our family. We've got to make sure that we have a generous eye for those who have needs. In Proverbs 21, to back up, Proverbs 21, verse 13, he says, whoever shuts his ear to the cry of the poor will also cry himself and not be heard. That's pretty harsh, isn't it? If you don't listen to the poor person, then whenever you have a need, you're not going to be heard. For verse 26 of that same chapter, chapter 21, he covets greedily all day long, but the righteous gives and does not spare. So what do we do with our money? We're generous. We store it up for our family and for others that have need. How does one honor God with our possessions? How do we honor God with our possessions? Any other thoughts of things we hadn't covered?
I think you honor him with your possessions when you use your possessions like he's given them to you. Like he really, you're a steward of them. He's allowed you to have them when you are looser to give. And I also think that kind of goes with contentment helps you, when you are content with what you have, then it's easier to give. And if you're greedily trying to store up your money, it's harder to let go of it. Just having this idea that God's going to,
So Amanda said that if we remember that God has provided it for us, and God is the giver, and that we are stewards, then it helps us to be generous. And that it helps us to be content by realizing that God has provided for us. Good point. So it kind of gets back to that idea of it's really God's anyways, and so we can share it with others. We can be content with it if we believe that God is the provider. Somebody else have a thought? Well, let's talk about debt. The danger of debt. What dangers have you seen in debt? Well, Proverbs talks a lot about it. Let's go to chapter 6. Chapter 6. My son, if you become surety for your friend, if you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger, you are snared by the words of your mouth. You are taken by the words of your mouth. So do this, my son, and deliver yourself, for you have come into the hand of your friend. Go and humble yourself. Plead with your friend. Give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. So he's talking about if you've loaned out money to a friend, or if you've borrowed money from a friend, you need to try to get out of that and deal with that. In chapter 11, talking about this, he says, He who is surety for a stranger will suffer. He who hates being surety is secure. Be thoughtful about co-signing with others or going in as a surety with someone else. Chapter 17. A man devoid of understanding shakes hands in a pledge and becomes surety for his friend. And then chapter 22. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. Borrower is servant to the lender. Do not be one of those who shakes hands in a pledge, one who is surety for debts. If you have nothing with which to pay, why should he take away your bed from under you? You might lose your bed. Nobody wants to lose their bed. It says if you don't have anything to pay, you may lose your bed. We might say in our culture, you might lose your house. They may foreclose on your house if you don't pay your debt. And I think certainly there's a lot of differences in the ancient culture and in some of the things Proverbs is talking about in our modern culture, but I have to say that there's a lot of principles here, isn't there? That we need to make sure that we don't borrow, we don't get in debt for more than we can afford. We need to make sure we're wise stewards with how we handle our income, make sure that we don't have more going out than we have coming in, and we need to realize the dangers of debt and how. Somebody trying to get me to borrow money right there. What dangers have you seen in debt? What'd you say, Joel?
You may want to get that warranty for your car.
Might need a car warranty right there. Well, any dangers in debt that you've seen? Yes. And once you get over the interest, Proverbs talks about interest, son, that interest begins to pile up and then it gets harder to get out of debt. So it creates a vicious cycle. Good point by Michelle there. Somebody else? Keeps you from being able to often do the things you want to do, to enjoy the life you want to live because you are paying for all the things from the past. It can cause a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety on people, a lot of pressure, a lot of problems. So the borrower is servant to the lender. Finally, laziness versus diligence. Laziness versus diligence. Boy, this was a big one in Proverbs. Look at all the verses. Let's just go to chapter 6. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Chapter 6, verse 6. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. Which having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall your poverty come on you like a prowler, and your knee like an armed man. Proverbs talks a lot about laziness. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 27. Well, let's start in verse 24. The hand of the diligent will rule, but the lazy man will be put to forced labor. Chapter 12, verse 27. The lazy man does not roast what he took in hunting. It's an interesting one. But diligence is man's precious possession. Diligence or hard work. On the page there, I have Mark had made a comparison of the two. And notice how the diligent, what happens to them. They become rich, gather crops early, have abundant food, reap their rewards, will rule over others, prize their possessions, are fully satisfied, bring in a profit, have an easy path, stay awake and have extra food, make careful plans, give without sparing, and keep abundance through work. But notice the lazy. The lazy are soon poor, sleep during the harvest, annoy others. That's an amen, right? Chase fantasies, will become slaves, waste good resources, want much but get little, experience poverty, have continuing troubles, love sleep and grow poor, make hasty speculations, desire but don't work, have many excuses, and experience poverty from laziness. Now, isn't that amazing? How Proverbs is so modern and all the same struggles we face today. I mean, you look at our culture and how we're struggling to find workers. I read a post today of a friend from Paris, Tennessee, who works in the marine boat sales, and he said in his interaction today, he had ran into, I think he said 25 different jobs that were open that people could not find jobs for. From factory workers to bank tellers to, they couldn't find workers, yeah. Couldn't find anybody, and some of them were, marine technicians, all the way down to just, needing someone to sweep the floors and do that kind of thing. And he's talking about how there's just nobody that wants to work to fill so many of these jobs. And so, getting back to the same issue, laziness versus diligence versus hard work and effort. And so, we're out of time. Jeff, you say something? I'm sorry, Jeff, I can't hear you with the rain starting. Make more on unemployment. Yes. Well, let's close by saying, Marty's going to lead us in a prayer. Let's close by saying I appreciate all your attention and comments. And if we don't have a formal invitation, but we do have the invitation open. If you'd like to speak to me about becoming a Christian, I'd be glad to study with you about that. If you need to rededicate your life in any way, certainly would talk to you about whatever we can do to help your spiritual needs. Thank you for being with us tonight, and we'll be dismissed after our closing prayer.
Will you pray with me? Heavenly Father,